Welcome to the To Read or Not to Read, the role of cover art. How does cover art influence our decision to read a book or not? We'll start the introductions on my left.
All right, my name is Patrick W. Marsh. I'm a writer. I write about monsters, but I'm reasonably nice for the most part. I'm in the basement here, appropriately enough, selling my books, so if you want to come see me down there. And I am a self-published author, and I've had lots of experiences with covers, including making my own, then hiring people to do it, which was definitely the better option, but I won't bear the lead yet. And yeah, that's kind of it.
Hi, I'm here in Cisco. I'm an author and producer, and yeah, I love covers. I am very, very, very adamant about, if not doing them myself, being very heavily involved with the artists that we hire. I'm also very, very big proponent of judging books by their cover art. Even if the story is awesome inside, I feel that there's definitely some value to having your first impression be a good one.
And my name is Christopher Jones. I'm an illustrator, and I've done covers for a number of different books and magazines. I have been involved in producing our work for this convention for a number of years, which includes covers for our souvenir program guide, including this year. But most of my work in this area has been in the realm of comic books. I've done stuff for DC, Marvel, Doctor Who comics for Titan, a number of other things, including the Young Justice series from DC Comics. So here we go.
All right then, let's start with what is your favorite kind of book cover? And we'll start on the right.
Oh goodness. I don't know that I've ever thought about it in terms of what is a favorite kind. I know that the thing I think is the most important about a cover is you want something that is going to grab the audience's attention, but then is actually going to hold their interest, and whether that is with some kind of spectacle, whether that is with your characters. We can get into a more nuanced exploration as we get into the panel. I think it depends on what kind of story you're doing and what medium you're in, but I think it's just this is avoiding your question because I don't have a good answer for your question. But I think the key thing about covers is first getting your audience's attention and making sure that you engage them in some way with what they see.
I'm kind of of two minds. So if it's for the story, I really like the more ambiguous, like artistic or poetic covers. There's an example I don't have with me, but A Clockwork Orange is one of my favorite novels, and there are dozens and dozens of different prints of it, different variations, but one of my favorites is just the lower half of a face screaming, and the top half is on fire, which is a fantastic cover, because it's like, what is this? But it's also sort of like this visual representation of the theme of the book, rather than the content, if that makes sense. But on the flip side, from an artistic standpoint, I really do like the detailed, almost overly artistic style. So if you think of like pulp magazines from like the 50s to the 70s, and like that kind of like, all right, here's like the really like ripped, buff guy all shiny with a space helmet and a cigarette at the same time for some reason, saving the damsel in distress from like some crazy robot with tentacles in the whole nine. Like, those are just so vivid, and it's like, all right. And when you read it, it's like, yeah, it's actually about this half-naked guy who smokes in space saving someone from a robot with tentacles. So there's sort of like, I like both the very like artistic interpretation, but also the very literal, but just graphically, aesthetically pleasing versions.
It does what it says on the package.
Yeah, that's a broad question for me. I like a variety of covers, but I do tend to lean more like abstract with the covers and stuff. It might be because I write about monsters and horror and stuff that I like to kind of create a question with the cover that the audience kind of has to answer by reading the book, which is kind of where I lean with creating my own covers, is less is more kind of idea, and I've always kind of thought that with monsters in general. But when it comes to like writing, like a good example of, I really like the original cover to Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, which is just a blank white. And then they changed it to like a weird red, like I think Barnes & Noble released an edition, or someone released an edition, where it's like a red knight marching along, and that one's cool, but apparently J.D. Salinger originally wanted it to be blank, which I thought was really cool. But I also have a huge, besides like abstract or barely any cover, I like covers for video games, old video game covers from like the 80s and 90s and stuff, where like hardcore sci-fi fantasy, where there's lots of imagery, lots of details and stuff, so I'm kind of all over the place.
For myself, my favorite type of cover is the painted or drawn scene that is also more or less in the book. I am able to accept a certain amount in accuracy as long as I can recognize, once I get to that part of the book, hey, that's the scene that was on the cover.
I like truth in advertising on a cover. I feel like if the cover convinces someone to check out the story inside, at some point they should feel like the story delivered on what the cover promised.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And conversely, what makes your eyes slip off a book cover so that you might not pick it up?
Oh man, a bunch of different things now I think about it. I have to say that when I'm looking for a book, there has to be like some sort of question. Like I said earlier, there has to be a question that's being asked of me with the cover. Like recently I read the Hyperion Cantos by Dan Simons. I think that's his name, yeah. But I only got interested in it because there's a picture of the Shrike, which is one of the monsters from it, on the cover, and I was like, what is that thing? And that's kind of how I got into it. But yeah, I have to say that with book covers that I'm going to read, the cover has to not be too genre-y, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. It can't be like too fantasy, too sci-fi. There has to be like a little bit of ambiguity to it, and I don't know why that is for me. Just kind of what I prefer. But I feel like because the literary and genre have been kind of crisscrossed now with modern writing, that kind of happens more often. Like I'm thinking of the cover to Black Leopard, Red Wolf, which I read, and that had a really abstract cover, but really captured the essence of the story in the book if you read it. So yeah, that's kind of it.
So I concur totally with Patrick. There's just, if it's too tropish, so a lot of fantasy novels, like I discovered that I actually love the fantasy genre in literature, but I didn't know that I did because so often a lot of the titles that aren't like the big classic ones look exactly the same. There's some pseudo-medieval motif happening. Every dragon looks like a dragon, even though dragons aren't real, so why can't they look like anything? And so I'd see that and just immediately just kind of go past it. Similar thing with the Harlequin, which might be a little cliche, but if there is like anything that has Fabio on it, he's fun to look at, sure, but there's only so many ways that you can rip a shirt off and hold some woman in a storm or on a horse, or you know. And it's just kind of like, there's nothing, those could
37 ways. There are 37 ways.
That could be some of the greatest literature ever put to the page. I would have no idea, because every time I see the cover, it's like,
pass. Definitely, the different tropes or things like that, but I hate to sound like an art snob. If I don't like the art, it's the subject matter, of course, is a big part of it, but especially when I'm dealing in the world of comic books, when you're going to be getting told a visual story. Mm-hmm. If I look at the cover and I'm like, yeah, I don't want to have that be the filter that I have to experience the story through, which is especially unfair because very often the cover isn't drawn by the same artist as the story inside. But when you're just browsing the shelves, it's the job of the cover, and I think this is true at a bookstore or a comic book shop or whatever. The job of the cover is, you have a wall of options in front of you, and the cover is what has to make you pick it up and learn more. Whether that's reading a synopsis, whether that's looking at the interior of a comic book, the cover has to jump out and grab you, and just the aesthetic value of, do I like the artwork, can be a big factor.
I really dislike the generic photograph of a person with, okay, we have a person there, often with their back to the camera. Is this supposed to be a person from the story, or are you just putting your vacation photographs on the cover? By the way, I'm Scott Jamison, Skidjam on the internet. I do a book review website. At one point, I reviewed a book on cybersecurity that has saguaro cactus on the cover. And it turned out that was because the author had gone on vacation, snapped that saguaro thing on there and said, nah, I don't want to put a computer on my cybersecurity book. I'm going to put a saguaro cactus on there. It'll make it stand out in the cybersecurity area.
They should at least have had to add a tagline, like cybersecurity is a very prickly business. Something. Yes.
Okay, since all of you have been designed in book cover design at one point or another, what goes into designing a cover for you?
Well, if I could circle around to something I was alluding to earlier, to me, some of it depends on the medium. I think if you are trying to create a cover for a story that is in a non-visual medium like a prose novel, I'm reluctant to clearly show the likenesses of the characters because I prefer to let that live in the imagination of the reader. I think you want to leave them the option to personalize who that character is for their reading experience. Whereas, you know, whether it's a comic book cover, whether it's a movie poster, you know, if the specific visual likeness is already there, then go ahead and use it. I feel like with comics especially, you're selling the characters. You are trying to get the audience to connect to the characters in your story, and you can put them in a great action moment or something, but really it's about getting them interested in, like, I want to read about who that person is. The first comic book I ever did a cover for, I have learned so much since then. It was a book of my own. A friend of mine wrote it. I did the art, and we thought we were being very classy and sophisticated. I tried to do it like it was a movie poster. We had, you know, close-up dramatic shots of our two lead characters in kind of head and shoulders looking out towards the audience. And there was like a little bit of action in a montage sort of way at the bottom of a car exploding and some stuff. And I look back now and I'm like, what was I thinking? Because when you see that kind of thing on a movie poster, you're selling the likenesses of the actors that the audience already knows. Whereas in this case, it was these two dudes that no one had ever heard of before, and why would you care? So, you know, that really anything illustration is about communication. It's not just about the visual, it's about what you're telling your audience with that visual. So whether it's a situation, whether it's genre, whether it's introducing a character, it's what combination of those things you want to accomplish. And I'm also, as was mentioned earlier, I'm big on the truth in advertising part of, I always, you know, if I get asked to do a cover for a book that I didn't work on, the interior, you know, like as a comic book, I'm always like, you know, is there a story point I can build a cover around rather than just doing some generic action thing, because I want to have the reader feel like the story paid off what was on the cover. So those are my first considerations.
Awesome. Sorry. I don't know, I think my approach is just about, it's very dependent upon the story itself and the intent. So, an example, I wrote a collection of short stories called Rot String Nail Cloth, which is an allusion to this Hellenic mythology. It's a puzzle, like if you have a ship and you start replacing the mast, you replace the sails, you replace floorboards. At what point is this no longer, is it still the same ship if everything's been replaced, that kind of thing. And the idea with rod string nail cloth is that same question, but for people, like how much of ourselves can we lose?
My review completely missed that.
And I was hoping with the cover, which is about like an overexposed sort of like cross-section X-ray smooshy together. It's like, oh, like what is it that makes us us mentally? What is it that makes us physically? Is it us spatially, where we exist in time, kind of thing with the different stories. So the cover was kind of like, clearly not as effective as I'd hoped, but it was trying to kind of help push that thesis or that question out there without explicitly saying it. Or in other cases, it's a lot more obvious. So I'm just gonna keep self-promoting, which is right. But with my foray into fantasy, I was using a lot of things pulled from like West African folklore and French mythology, because I figured we had enough Arthurian legends out there. If you want to see dragons and swords and horses, there are billions of options. So for me, like we're gonna stick to this other stuff. But realizing that because it's not done as much, that some of the imagery might not be as easy to envision with just the prose. So then using the cover, that's when I have to hire, I went to a young woman, Bridget Warner. Highly recommend her if you're looking for an artist. She's very affordable. She lives in Germany, but her English is amazing, because my German sucks. Yes. Because I wanted to show the character and explain some of these different markings, which I, wrote about. Thank you. I shouldn't think, but Bridget is an amazing artist. And I wrote about it, so I started thinking like, oh, so she has these citruses and she has these markings, which if you're familiar with certain like tribal accolades, then of course, you know right away what that means. But without getting bogged down in like a sort of like Kerouac-y, Anne Rice-y. And I love Kerouac, I love Anne Rice, but she is very descriptive in a way that I am not. And so I was like, oh, we'll just do this, put this in the cover, and this is what she looks like, do this, and like here's some reference points. And it's like, boom. So that was, I thought, a very effective way, again, to sort of help augment the content of the story. Similarly, the old series, or old for me, was Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Where, I mean, not just the cover, of course, the illustrations inside as well, but the cover specifically using that charcoal technique added to the ominousness, I'm a writer, that's the word, I'll say it with confidence.
Ominousity.
Yes, the ominousity of the book, like just looking at the cover like, oh, this is going to be creepy, even though it's not really that creepy, it's sort of like Diet Twilight Zone, but the artwork on the cover, you're like, ooh, it really helped create that mood. Stephen King's novels are also, depending on which print version you get, really good about capturing that atmosphere of like, okay, this is going to be one of his more interesting esoteric attempts, or this is going to be like, oh, no, he's trying to destroy any chance I have of sleeping tonight. And that's just based again on the cover art.
Yeah, for me, I'll just talk about the first book I self-published called Beware the Ills, which is a dark fantasy that takes place on a snowy island. When I published it like 10 years ago, I was coming off a bad breakup, living in my parents' basement, had no skills, no abilities, just literally went on Amazon's Create Space at the time and self-published a book. And this book that Beware the Ills takes place, it's a dark fantasy setting on a snowy island that the climate never changes. And I went through Amazon's stock photos that they offered you, and I couldn't go into the vendor room this morning and get my book to bring it. I even banged on the door all ominously to try to get in, but they still weren't. No one was down there. But that's the cover of it that ended up. I'm getting, it's black and white. I don't know if you can see it very well. Sorry, that's on my phone. So I went with, I was like, it's a snowy picture. It's a snowy island. Good enough. Like threw it on there, and now. 10 years later, I'm revising the book and re-releasing it in a new edition, and I hired a cover artist off of Instagram, and I always forget his like handle, but it's like Bearded Pirate Art or something like that, but I found his style, and it was abstract and weird, just kind of what I like. I just printed off a photo. I haven't actually released it as an edition, but that's like the new cover of it and stuff, so. But yeah, it's, I don't even know what I'm gonna use it, but I literally just went with what Amazon gave me because I had no money at the time. Like I said, no skills to do any of this kind of stuff. Didn't know any cover artists, which thankfully I started doing conventions, and that's how I got to know cover artists and stuff. But yeah, I just literally kind of went with whatever opportunities kind of gave me at the time. But now more removed and with more resources and connections and stuff, and of course more money, I can make better decisions about it. But at the time, I was just like, I'll go with this. It's snowy, that's snowy, perfect.
Yeah. I have never designed a book cover myself. I did not particularly like the cover design for me of the one book I had published, Allies for the Champions Game. But I did bring a couple of samples here. This is Valhalla, Into the Darkness by Lee Gold. If I did not know the author personally, my eyes would have just slid right past it in the store. It's dark, it's stock photo manipulation. Doesn't really represent what's inside. But, and that may explain why it's not selling that hot. Whereas the last unicorn here, Bright, has a semi-abstract unicorn on the cover, so you can tell that, yes, there's supposed to be a unicorn in this book. I think this one's a good cover. Okay, let's see if, are we ready for questions from the audience? Okay,
Yeah.
Questions from the audience. In green shirt?
Sorry?
In the green shirt?
You.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I actually had a kind of a failed attempt at hiring myself out as a book cover artist. I was just curious as to what is a good price range that you either as an artist would set or as an author would expect to pay.
Well, I know I can just speak from my own experience on it, and I don't have a ton, but for this cover, it was $300 for my book. Plus, he's going to send me like the actual image. It's like the painting he makes. It's all acrylic paintings that he does. But I've got another artist, who I've worked with for a while. That's cheaper. It's like $100 per cover. But like I'm not like oftentimes there's a negotiation or discussion, or the cover artist looks at who you are and what you're doing, and they're like, well, I know what they can probably afford and not, like there's some sort of discussion. I mean, it's not always like exact or anything.
Yeah, 300 sounds about in line with what I guess I would have had to offer as it varies so much. It depends on the person starting out. It depends on whether they're retaining the image rights, that they get to do something else with the artwork afterwards if they want, or if it's exclusively belongs to the publisher or the author in perpetuity. It's always hard for me to answer because there's like, oh, I'm doing a cover for a comic book publisher versus, oh, a friend of mine has their first novel coming out and they asked if I'd do a cover for them, and I'm like, yeah, no, you can't pay me. So, it's all over the map.
I grossly overpaid. No.
So work for him.
Okay, person with the glasses on top of their head.
So to follow up to that one, does that include the cover layout, or is it just the art piece for the front? Because I've talked to some cover artists who are also doing like the ISBN number in the back and all that stuff together.
Oh, wow.
So what is that including with what you're paying? I presume Christopher is just talking about the front cover, but.
Yeah, I mean, usually if you're hired to do cover art, you're just talking about the principal image, all the, I don't know if it's called this across all media. I'm used to hearing it called trade dress. But the logo and the price and the ISBN number and all that business usually is formatted by the publisher, because they'll have a standard way that they do it. It is one of the things when you're doing a cover that, one of the first things I always ask is, is there already a logo for this, and can I see it so I can allow for it in the composition? Mm-hmm. That's an important thing to be aware of, depending on the medium you're working in.
If you're self-publishing, you're not dealing with
Yeah.
Did you have a different answer, Brad?
Yeah, I just get the image, yeah. And like when it comes to like the font and the layout and stuff, usually I'm on my own, but like the cover artists I've gotten to know pretty well, and I'll like be like, hey, how does this look? You know, send it to them, and they'll be like, yeah, those letters need to be whiter, they need to be grayer, you know, they'll give me some feedback and stuff, and I usually always listen to them, because I don't know what I'm doing. But this cover I wanted to show, and again, I don't have my book, so I'll show you the cover, but this is a cover from the Greenland Diaries. This is it's apocalyptic horror found journal book series that I write. That's the original cover of it, and that was from an Amazon template. And it worked just at the time. Like I said, I kind of went with what they gave me. And it worked at the time because it looks like a found journal. It's meant to look like something you just find on the side of the road after some sort of calamity. But I went to MarsCon 4 or 5 years ago, and another author in line with me on the table selling books and stuff had the exact same template as me. And I walked up to him, and it was kind of like we were dating the same person, and we just realized it. We were just like, hi. And his was like a sci-fi gravity novel, and mine was this, and it was just really funny. But now I found a new cover. I got a new cover for this, and again, I couldn't get my books to show you, so I'll have to show you on my phone. But that's the new cover of it now, and that's done with a cover artist and stuff that I met through one of the conventions. And just really quick, a funny tragic story about him is when he was starting out doing cover art and stuff like that, and he's a designer. A studio called DreamWorks Animation approached him to work on a movie called Shrek way back in the day, and they were like, well, we're not going to pay you for like a year, like we just don't have the money to pay you, so it'll all be basically pro bono. And he was like, no, I got a family and stuff, I need to make money or whatever. Then a year later, like Shrek came out, and he was like, what have I done? So yeah, just kind of a random, but he's one of my cover artists for that series. I do have different cover artists for different books styles and stuff. Like he chiefly does the Greenland Diaries, then I have someone else do other like short story collections and fantasy and stuff.
I will say, if you are self-publishing or indie publishing, there are so many resources now, because Amazon does have those templates, but also like Canva has a lot of templates, Adobe offers all these, so if you get the artwork image, you can then take that file and then add it to the templates and then kind of mess around with the fonts and the layouts and that kind of thing to varying degrees of...
Yeah, it's like the success is like an abstract word for it, but like, yeah, there's definitely way more resources, where back then it was like, here's your 15 templates and you're gonna like it. But now, yeah, there's so much, it's become such a huge industry and marketplace.
Okay, the person in the vest.
I'm curious about the difference in experience between working artist directly with artist and author working directly together versus artist and publisher working together.
Publishers are jerks. No, I shouldn't say. Working with the artist is great directly, at least in my experience, because then you can actually have this creative exchange and say like, this is what I have in mind, and it's more of a collaborative experience, and it really is about, it sounds so cheesy, but about the art itself. Like about the art of the writing, about the art of the visual image. Whereas when working with publishers, there's this terrible aspect about marketability and profitability potential that comes into it, or these preconceived notions like, well, if this is a science fiction novel, this is a science fiction collection, this is what science fiction looks like.
There will be a rocket on the cover.
And it's very, 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 at least in my experience, extremely hard to get them to budge on what they believe is the right way to do something. And I'm like, this doesn't exist, I wrote this. And they're like, yeah, but since you've written this in this genre, well, this is what that means. Like, that's not what that means. This is what it means. And you go back and forth, and like, well, we're signing the paychecks, so they win.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's completely accurate. There's a whole like, marketing plan for like a specific genre that traditional publishers will have, and you kind of have to either fall in line or like your vision of what the story is might change dramatically or whatever, just from the cover. But I just like working one-on-one with the artists and stuff, and just like getting to know them, and kind of like, it's just a good experience in my opinion.
Working with a writer directly as opposed to with a publisher is the worst. No, that was a joke. To me, the big difference in the experience is if I'm working directly for a publisher, it's usually doing a cover for some property that is a pre-existing one. And so I kind of already know a visual for it, and I have a sense of who the characters are and the tone and all of that. If I'm working directly with a writer, it's usually for something that, it's a story they've written, I'm not already familiar with it yet, I haven't had a chance to read it. And so there's a lot more back and forth with trying to understand what it is that they want and what's going to effectively represent their story better. And even just aside from subject matter, just style and tone is such a hard thing to agree upon in a word-based conversation as opposed to visuals. I recently had an experience trying to do a cover for a novel that didn't work out because the person came to me with an idea of what they wanted, and I gave them sketches of about 7 different ways to compose what they wanted, and they were like, I kind of like this one, but can we do this? And so I did a whole other set of sketches, and they're like, okay, let's do that one. And so I did that, and they were like, yeah, okay, we'll proceed with that. And I did a finished version, and they looked at it, and he's like, yeah, I showed it to some friends, and everyone thinks it looks like a young adult novel, and it's not. I just don't think this is working. And it's like, okay, because I delivered on what he asked me to do, and we walked through it every step of the way, and then we arrived on something, and he looked at it and was like, nope. And so I got paid, thankfully, but he ended up going elsewhere for a cover, so that can happen too.
Yeah. I don't know how much is done nowadays, but back in the older times, sometimes the publisher wouldn't even bother sending a full description of the book to the artist and just told them, we want a cover with X. Or just send us several science fiction cover arts and we will apply them to any book that seems like they might fit.
Oh, there's a long tradition, I think, in both regular book publishing, for the lack of a better term, and comics of, having a piece of cover art and just slapping it on a book and expecting the cover to do its job, but not really caring about how it connects to the story at all, which is not my favorite thing, but it happens.
That's so I have a terrible story, very short, but there's a fantastic novel or movie called The Black Dahlia. I saw it and knowing nothing about the case, and then in the credits it's based on this novel. So I ran out to Barnes & Noble back when that was still a thing, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna get The Black Dahlia. And then I got this book and I was like, this isn't it, because the book edition that I picked up was all black. It had the words Black Dahlia on it, and then it had this very, very alabaster woman's face on it. And I was like, oh, this is kind of like when you call a bald guy curly. This is gonna be like an Elmore James novel. It's gonna be all these colored folks doing colored folk stuff. And it wasn't. It's about this horrible crime that was committed in Los Angeles in the 30s.
Yeah.
But the cover was so bizarre because it was just this woman's face. She had a very, very high SPF requirement. And I was like, Black Dahlia? The only thing black in this book is so that felt very, and it didn't tell you anything. It was also a very grisly murder if you're unfamiliar with the case. So it's like, oh, she's not as pretty in the book as they put her on the cover.
Okay. All right. Another tip I'd like to say is if you're doing a series, you should probably pick a format that will work with every volume in the series. This is modeled by Rumiko Takahashi. Basically, one character per cover, title, and then on the back will be one character, larger pose.
It can be an amazing experience to walk into a bookstore and go into their comics section, and you look at the rows of collected, graphic novels, comic books on the shelves, and the American books, even stuff from the same publisher, like the Batman books alone, are just all kinds of different spine formats and different widths and different overall sizes to the books. It's just this hodgepodge of stuff. And then you look at the manga section, and it's these amazing rows of matched covers and just 20 volumes, and all is just of a piece. It's just gorgeous. They'll have a graphic that continues across the spines of 20 books, and which publishing industry has their acts together? But part of that comes from it's the thing that American comics never seems to understand in chasing after the popularity that manga has in Japan, is that it's not just necessarily the story substance or the art style. It's the fact that the first selling point of manga typically is stories being serialized in large anthology collections that are on sale, not in specialty comic book shops, but at tube stations to commuters. And that's a very different selling job to do. And then the first time usually these storylines get all collected into their own, it's exclusively this storyline, are these volumes where it already has a following, you already know you're doing a long series, and so you can do these beautifully designed packages, of which those seem to be a fine example. And it's just such a different thing of American comics always seem to be chasing after, we're gonna do something crazy and different with this release, and it's so it just ends up looking like this random hodgepodge of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's I was just in the manga thing, and I've just noticed that recently because I've started buying manga again at bookstores, and the cover art and it stands out. It's really I was looking at the volumes of Berserk that are out, the big giant ones they have, and I was just the covers are kind of misleading because it's just the blackness and then the curse mark or whatever it is. And then you're just what is this? And I remember one of my stepsons got it, and he was this is a horrible story. And I'm it is, but he's I wasn't there when he bought it, so he just kind of got it himself. And I was just yeah, it's pretty gruesome. He's I didn't think that's what it was about. And I'm well, yeah, it is. But it's just, if you have kids and stuff, covers can be misleading. You do have to kind of be responsible as a parent and be yeah, this is not for you, even though the cover looks one way or another. But I think as authors, and if you release books and stuff, that's always a chance you're going to take, is that someone's not going to understand what they see, and that's just part of it.
Is manga serialized in the same way artistically, or is it generally across 20, 30 volumes? Is it usually the same artistic team?
You'll have shorter storylines, but I would say there tends to be more books done by what we would call creator-owned comics, where it's there is a creator or team of creators that own a property and have done all of it. However, they end up, they'll be the name creator, and then they'll have a team of uncredited assistants that help them produce the artwork. It's a very different system. But it does mean that the product, if you start following a series, it's all going to be of a piece. It all is stylistically consistent, as opposed to American comics where, I don't care who your favorite character is, it's had, dozens and dozens of different creative teams over the years, and has, different eras or vastly different books. So yeah, it's a very different world.
I was just curious to know with I'm mansplaining comics to Christopher Jones. So with Image, remember when that came out in the 90s? And I was I was a huge fan of McFarlane's Spawn, and I remember Spawn seemed so consistent until he took that hiatus in 93 briefly, and then they changed teams. That's why I was just curious, if it's the same team, it feels there's that consistency. Even in American comics, where you're someone else is writing it now, or when Sam Keith did Max, because he has that really weird Ralph Steadman style. But then when someone else took over, or like, I always forget the artist name who does like Trencher and like the very, or like Global's Back, it was kind of like, it was very consistent, but you could always tell immediately when they had a new like pencil or inker take over, because then the style changed. So I was just curious, like with manga, if it's the same team.
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, because, you know, I don't know how driven by covers the topic is, but yeah, that's definitely a function of it being that you have a publisher driving the title. I mean, even though Todd McFarlane owns Spawn, you know, anytime you have different creators coming on, it's because someone at a publisher level is basically farming it out, as opposed to, yeah, most manga, it's the original creator still in charge. They'll retire the book when they're done doing it.
Yep. Going back to Berserk for a moment, Kentaro Miura, the creator of Berserk, died a year or so ago, and there was a huge deal about whether his assistants could carry on or if they would just have to end the series in the middle.
Do we know what happened?
Yeah, they're continuing it on.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is very unusual for a series to continue after the death of the original artist. Okay, Orange.
Yeah, you talk about how important even font and how your title presents can catch your eye, or it can just be completely missed. You can't read it easily, like things like that. Do you have favorites or tropes or things that bug you about that kind of thing?
It's great when there's a way that, I mean, yeah, clarity is important. My pet peeve is logos that you're like, what does that say? But yeah, if there's something you can do that that thematically speaks to the story that you can somehow visualize in a logo, that's amazing. I was noticing over here the Shadow t-shirt. I'm a huge fan of old pulp covers. And the Shadow covers are, first of all, they're just visually gorgeous, but they would repeatedly play with shadow silhouettes and different ways of incorporating that into the image, which, you know, for the character is just awesome. And the logo on that cover doesn't specifically do it, but I've seen a lot of covers where they'll have the Shadow title casting a big drop shadow across the image. It's like, oh, that's nice. Obviously that, you know, some titles lend themselves to that kind of treatment more than others. You know, Batman has had a ton of different logos on different books over the years, but most of them, not all, but most of them will incorporate some kind of bat silhouette behind the text. Like I said, some books, you know, lend themselves to that better than others.
I love consistency with the series. If it's a one-off, I want it to be very straightforward. But very early on, my very first book, long time ago, I was introduced to the Trajan font, and I was like, yes, this is my absolute favorite font.
That's a good font.
Right? Everything, every book I've done, whether it's been for someone or it's like indie published, I'm like Trajan Pro 3. It's the greatest font. And then I was convinced for my children's book to change it, so I went Trajan Bold. Because the one time I deviated from the Trajan font,
You stepped outside of your comfort zone,
like,
Trajan Bold.
What the fuck is this? This is no way now. Whoops. What the hell? I was like, just completely takes me out of it. But it's like, I read a lot of Star Trek novels because I'm a big Star Trek fan, and Star Trek has a very, very distinctive font, both the original series, Next Generation, whatever iteration is, and they carry that over into the covers of the novels. And I just love that. I think I would be weirded out if I picked up like a Star Trek Voyager paperback and it had some like Comic Sans or something. Actually, if I picked up anything and it had Comic Sans, I'd be a little weird.
If you see Comic Sans, walk away. Sorry. Ignore that.
How we doing? We're done.
Oh, 15 minutes.
Oh, excellent. Righty. Best.
Just to follow up on that, the library that I grew up with, the paperback section, had all of the Star Wars and Star Trek scattered by author in their own section. But I could go just take my finger, run down the aisle, Star Trek.
And that's why cover design is important.
It was
Yes.
fantastic.
Reddish mask.
Okay. Do you know the books numbered, like 1, 2, 3, rather than just, oh, you have to figure out where this is in the series?
I don't know that that's really in the realm of cover art. That's the publisher.
Okay.
That would be the publisher, first of all, having enough of a plan to be thinking about whether they want to be numbering this book series, if it's jumping around in any way. But then, yeah, in the same way that, you know, if it's the publisher putting on the logo and the price and the ISBN number and all that, I mean, that would be part of that process, not part of what the cover artist does in creating artwork for the cover.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think it heavily depends on whether you are definitely supposed to read the books in order or not. For manga, of course, it absolutely does require that you have the number on the cover or on the back spine. Whereas even though this is the 35th book in the series, you're supposed to be able to read them in basically any order because it's standalone mysteries. So no number on the cover. They will tell you inside that's number 35 in the series.
And yeah, I write a book series of found journals, and I number them all by days on the cover, and I just have to have that, or else people will be like, well, what is happening here? And they want to know that it's part of a series. Getting people to commit to a book series, you have to have that information. But I don't know if there's any sort of standardization or anything like that when it comes to it. I think it is mostly like the publisher and writer with the cover. The first book I wrote, Beware the Ills, like the first book sale I had at Crypticon in 2013 of it, the person was like, is this part of a series? And it wasn't part of a series, but I was just like, yeah, it is, buy the book. And of course, now I have to write a sequel to it like 10 years later. But I think it'd be nice, most authors, especially the self-published authors, who I think have a better vision of this kind of than maybe traditional ones because there is so many more variables. I think most self-published authors know that's going to be a series to a point. Like I might be an outlier, but I think they're like, yeah, it's going to be multiple books, and we're going to make that aware to the people who are interested in them.
It occurs to me that the truthful answer to is this a series is if it sells well enough, sure.
Yeah, everything's a series if it sells well enough. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I have a question. Do you find, yes, our audience too, but with the increasing attention on the digital formats, that's impacted the way that you do your covers? Case in point, my first 3 novels were very intricate. There's a lot happening because I didn't acknowledge digital ebooks or anything like that. And then as ebook sales and things like that, and just ebook usage has gone up, and people reading stuff on their phones, not even tablets anymore. I got it on my Amazon Kindle app or whatever. I'm like, okay, well, this art looks amazing, 6x9, looks less so 2x4 or whatever. Mm-hmm. So then I've started simplifying. I was wondering if that's the same thing with comic books too.
Yeah, I don't know that I think of that so much specifically in the realm of covers, but generally with comic book art, I know that there tends to be way more detail in the art than there used to be, and part of that is you could see the detail now that it's nicer paper and better quality printing. Mm-hmm. But now that it's digital as well, you can look at a panel on the size of your screen. And so I'm always very aware when I'm doing the art that this had better hold up to that kind of scrutiny because, I work mostly digitally now, but back when I was exclusively drawing my comics with physical media on paper, you take a little head the size of a postage stamp and blow it up, and it's not going to be my best piece of portraiture. And you can't get away with that now. It's terrible. So, that's something I worry about.
Yeah, me too. I just kind of roll the dice with it, I think, a little bit and hope that digitally it'll still look as nice as it would physically. I prefer physical books myself, but I know that people like to consume a lot of books and they'll go with the Kindle and stuff. I will say that if I comb through Amazon at all the bestsellers and stuff, all the covers are really genre-y. They're it's the romance, the high fantasy, the sci-fi, they're super like that is definitely science fiction. Like there's no way that's not science fiction. Like, you know, and for me, I'm just as a writer and a storyteller, I write in genre, but it's not specific to those genre, like the genre, like rules, if you want to call it that. So it's a bit more difficult. I know I had someone review me on Goodreads, and they were like, this cover, you know, the cover did a terrible job of telling me what this book was about. And I'm like, I mean, that's kind of good. I'll take it. You know, like, thanks for reviewing the book. But I also, you know, have had one person on Amazon buy the Greenland Diaries, and they thought it was about like Vikings and stuff. And I'm like, and they wrote a like 1-star review. This has got nothing to do with Vikings or Icelandic sagas or anything like that. And I'm like, yeah, and I was like, well, you know, you can't please everyone. Like it's literally impossible, and it's the most numbing thing to stop you from trying this stuff is thinking you can make everyone happy, but you can't.
Although it can be, not to contradict, there are instances where it can be somewhat helpful. So like my novel Dragon Variation, which is named after my favorite chess opening, because if you're gonna be nerds, just go all the way, right? And on the original, the first cover was just like a silhouetted image and then the chess notation for the Dragon Variation Sicilian opening. And then I got some feedback from a couple of, I won't say unhappy, but just confused buyers who were like,
Right.
this is not actually about the Sicilian opening. I was like, oh, you know what? That is an excellent point.
That's really funny.
And so I modified it. I'm also notorious, this is about cover art, not about the back covers, but I don't like putting detailed synopsi.
Yeah.
I don't like writing
Synopsization.
Yeah. Synapses. I like to do almost like a movie poster. I love to just have like very brief, kind of like
Right.
almost like a tagline, because I'm like, this is more intriguing. But to me, it's like, oh, this is way cooler
Yeah.
if I don't know going in. So that combined with, oh, there's a book cover that has chess notation with a chess opening for the title. And on the back, it doesn't say anything about what's inside. That's kind of misleading. So
Yeah.
the reader
No, that's a good
feedback
point.
can be somewhat help, but again, context.
Yeah, yeah,
'Cause, like,
exactly.
yeah.
And the back of the blurb on the back of the book, I assume that's a panel here. But like, that is really important. I agree, like less is more, in my opinion, with that, especially because there's so much material out there and so much narrative. It's seldom are you gonna find someone with a blank canvas in their brain who's just like, I know nothing about sci-fi, I know nothing about fantasy. You know, like you're not gonna find it anymore. Like it's so overpopulated.
On the other hand, I really hate back cover blurbs that are just a review from the New York Times.
Oh yeah, that drives
saying
me
how
nuts.
great this book is.
Yeah, that's worthless. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
I want a little more detail.
I think we got time for one more question.
Okay, and the man in blue. Person.
In my book collection, I you know, I can identify my books by my covers, and now that I'm reading a lot more ebooks, I don't associate a cover with it anymore. And it's almost kind of disappointing because when I was reading paperbacks, I mean, the cover's always there. And when I turn on my Nook, the cover isn't there unless I go to the front.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just don't get the visualization anymore.
That makes sense, yeah.
Kev's wrong, we have time for 2 more questions.
Blue.
So just a quick question, where is a good way to make connections with artists, cover artists type stuff? Like, Patrick, you had mentioned going to cons and whatnot, but I mean, how?
Yeah, for me, I just walked around and like talked to I would, yeah, in the vendor room and stuff. I would just talk to, because there's a lot of artists there selling their wares and stuff, and I would just,
Specifically RSLE. Go for it.
yeah, and they're, I mean, I've never had a bad conversation with anyone about it. And also on Instagram and stuff, I just follow artists that I like, and I'll send them a message on there and be like, how much do you do for your art and stuff? And but yeah, I think just having the conversations, which can be difficult, but like it's artists want to create art as well, so.
Online resource, like in addition to social, I love Fiverr as a jumping off point, Fiverr for some reason, because that's just like basically any service, creative or otherwise, and there's dozens of people, almost like Craigslist, but like organized and not as skeezy. And then also like some of the stock art websites, not to pull that art down or use it, so things like Pixabay, but because everyone who submits to Pixabay or like arts media and those kind of groups, they have like an artist like page where you can contact. So if you see someone, I mean, that's how I found Brigitte. I mean, again, meine Deutsch ist scheiße, but like, she had a bunch of stuff that she posted, I think it was on Pexels, which was like a collection, like a stock site where you can like either use stuff for free or you can download stuff for a small fee. But because she had her own page, I reached out and I was like, hey, I saw some of your work, it looks awesome. I think you and I could be a good fit for something I'm working on. And she wrote back like, you know, ich spreche kein English, blah, blah. I was like, oh shit, like, oh shoot, let me see how good my German is. And she's like, no, it's okay, I speak the English. I was like, yes, that is okay. But that's another good resource because you basically have these showcases, almost like portfolios from literally thousands of artists. Not that they'll all be interested, but at least it's a good place to start finding some folks. And Fiverr, again, is a marketplace. So if you find somebody, if you literally go to Fiverr, type in book cover artist, you'll get hundreds, thousands of results. Or just ask Chris, he's right here. Just say, hey man.
You know, when I have been in artist alleys at conventions, I mean, you're there to do business, and even if you're not at that moment available and in the market for new commissions, you know, it's part of the job description. So you're not certainly going to get offended by someone asking. You know, if I get asked, you know, basically it's two things. Do I have time at the moment, and can they does their budget align with what my requirements are? But yeah, I mean, please don't let yourself feel intimidated by approaching someone, because like that's what they're there for. You know, if they're in a setting like a convention, it's to do business. So yeah, I think we're
Okay, last thoughts, starting from Mr. Jones.
I love doing cover art. I love doing cover art for my own stories. It annoys me when a publisher will insist on assigning someone else to do the cover for a story I've drawn, partly because I want to put my own packaging on something I've done, but also it really is frustrating when I'm at a convention and someone will come by and I'll be like, oh yeah, I drew this. All right, well not this, I drew the inside. This is somebody else, this isn't me. That's annoying. That's my last thought, that's annoying.
I guess my final thought would be, it is possible to separate, like you can't separate art from artist, my 2 cents, but it's totally possible to separate good art from books that you're not super hip to. I've definitely bought a lot of paperbacks and things like that because the cover was fantastic and got halfway through the novel, like, well, I'm not reading that, but the cover is fantastic. So it's super okay to spend money on books that look good even if they don't read well. There you go.
Yeah, and just going off that, having selling books here in the basement, I had my first year CONvergence selling books. I had a guy buy my book purely because of the cover. He was very honest. He was like, I am not going to read this, but I love the cover. And I was like, just give me the money. It sounds good. But like, one thing about it is, it's okay to like try making covers and, you know, finding stock images. Just try, just give it a shot. And there's so many resources now and so many cool people out there that can help with it. And I just, yeah, having done it for 10 years, it's just, you got to start someplace, so give it a shot.
I have business cards for my review website up here and free books. Anything not taken here will go up to the book swap. So keep that in mind for after the panel. I'd like to thank you all for coming and for our excellent guests for giving us a good panel.
This is a not so good cover as far as I'm concerned, and this one I think is an excellent cover for this particular book.
Oh well. Got it.
And these are an example of how to do a series to make the series obviously available as a group.
Got it. And talk about your favorite cover. Say, this is my favorite cover.
And this is one of P. Aaron Cisco's covers, which is pretty darn good.
I haven't released this on my revision of my book, Beware the Ills, yet because it's a mess to revise. But that's the cover from that. And this is my original cover from my first book, my second book, The Greenland Diaries. That's got a new cover downstairs. But yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.